Hello and welcome to Speak Truth to Power and our fall 2023 speaker series. My name is Rebecca Stevens and I'm the Human Rights Education Capacity Building Program Manager here at Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights. And today I'm joined by two change makers who I'm very excited to see. We've got Peter Bromberg, who's the Associate Director of EveryLibrary. We have Milo Bezier, who's a senior at George School and the president of his school's Amnesty chapter. So thank you so much for being here. If you have any questions as we start this conversation, please just pop them into the chat. We'll be monitoring it and we'll have a question and answer session at the end. And we'll get to as many questions as we can before the end of the hour. So I just want to start us off today by thanking Peter Bromberg for being with us today. He brings over 30 years of library experience to his work, advocating for libraries on local, state, and national levels. He provides pro bono consulting to librarians, boards, associations, ballot committees, and watchdog groups, helping them to fight censorship through the use of effective messaging and political strategies to build coalitions and community support. Peter, welcome.
Thank you, Rebecca. I really appreciate the invite to be here with you today.
And I'd also like to welcome Milo Bezier, who's a senior at George School, in Newtown, Pennsylvania. He's the leader of the Sexuality and Gender Alliance and the president of his school's Amnesty International chapter. And he'll be our student moderator today. Welcome, Milo.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you to all of you who are signing in here. We're so happy to have you with us today. Today, Peter and Milo are going to take a closer look at how to address the mounting book bans and challenges that are creating anxiety and fear in our public schools and our public libraries and limiting access to books. According to PEN America, during the first half of the 2022-2023 school year, over 1,477 books were banned. This includes over 800 individual titles, largely targeting books by and about people of color and LGBTQ+ individuals. We will end the conversation today with ways that you can take action. Before we begin our conversation, I'd like to introduce you to our organization and to our program. Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights advocates for human rights issues and pursues strategic litigation to hold governments accountable at home and around the world. Speak Truth to Power is our human rights education program that combines storytelling and interactive learning to provide the next generation with the concrete knowledge that they will need to create change and advance human rights. With that, I'll turn it over to Milo. He's been working on a campaign to address book bans and challenges at his school. So Milo, could you start us off by telling us a little bit about your work and then introducing Peter?
Yes, of course. Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you, Peter, and everybody watching today. If you have questions for us, please post them in the comment section below and we'll answer them as time permits. So I've had a lot of experiences with banned books. In my English class, we had all of our books that we read were banned books. And I really just find it fascinating how they're challenged for such almost ridiculous reasons. I've worked with my Amnesty club at school with bringing information and education to the issue of banned and challenged books. And we've also done a bit of a letter writing campaign to our local school board when they began banning and challenging books. And this is Peter, and we're going to talk a little bit about his work at EveryLibrary and about what you could do in case there's something going on about banned books near you. Now, let's start our discussion. Peter, could you tell us a little bit about your work with EveryLibrary and how you came to get involved with this organization?
Sure. So as Rebecca mentioned, I've been a librarian for 31 years now. Might be more if you lose track after a couple, right? But a number of years back in 2010, 2011, my friend John Kraska, who was at the time the membership director of a national library organization that I was involved with also, had this idea to start EveryLibrary as a nonprofit, particularly to help libraries to win funding. Now, across the country, libraries are locally funded and locally governed, and sometimes there's state laws and local laws that really determine, but many libraries have to go to the voters on a regular basis to get approval for their budget or to get a budget increase or to get money to build a new building or to fix a building, that kind of thing. And what we were seeing was that many libraries would go to the voters and would lose when they didn't necessarily need to, but they didn't really know how to run an information only campaign. They didn't know how to necessarily find and activate local supporters to form a local ballot committee. And that's the committee that can actually do the political get out the vote work. So libraries as political institutions generally are prohibited from asking voters to vote yes on their budget, but so you need an independent citizens group to do that. And so John had this vision of starting EveryLibrary in 2012 to help support libraries and citizens residents across the country who support libraries to make sure that libraries were well funded so they could be appropriately staffed and provide the kinds of great services that they need to their communities. At the same time, always was doing what we would call rapid response, where there was some type of a threat or an emergency that could have been funding, but it could have also been political. It could have been a book banning. It could have been any number of things where we would jump in and help to organize local residents to find each other, to connect, and to help give them strategies and tools and oftentimes money to fight back, to defend against those threats. So I joined the board in 2013 as what we'd call a working board member. So I had full-time jobs or more than full-time jobs sometimes. But being on the board, I not only helped with the governance, but learned how to do the actual consulting work. So I might fly into a city and spend a couple days training library staff, meeting with local elected officials, meeting with local ballot committee members and helping to get them trained and that type of thing, working remotely sometimes to help libraries or ballot committees on how they did social media to find and activate voters. And then, of course, 2 years ago, ish, I guess, we started to see this significant rise of censorship in America. And I was still on the board of EveryLibrary, but I was at the time the director of the Salt Lake City Public Library, and made a decision about 2 years ago to leave that position and join EveryLibrary full time, specifically to help fight against censorship, and really with an initial focus on some of the state legislation that we continue to see that was designed to enable censorship, enable board takeovers and all sorts of things. So that's really how I came to the work that I'm doing today.
That's awesome. We'll be talking a lot about banned and challenged books today. So to start us off, could you tell us about your favorite banned or challenged book and why it's important to have access to it?
Yeah, it's I love this question. It's difficult, like when we frame it as a favorite banned book, like, we wish no books were banned or challenged, right? But I know what you mean. And actually, as I've been thinking about this, my answer changed this week just because The Diary of Anne Frank is back in the news. It's been challenged in at least that I know of 2 districts in Texas, 2 in Florida. I'm sure in other places as well, and know that it's also off the shelves. It's been pulled off the shelves in at least 2 districts, and other libraries, school libraries, are like, they won't say where the book is, so it's probably off the shelf. So I picked that one, I guess, for a number of reasons. I mean, one, I always find memoir very powerful, right? The power of an individual voice telling a story, and I've always been fascinated by the paradox of that when someone tells a very specific personal story, it becomes more generally relatable in terms of universal human values and experiences. And of course, I think it's important because her story serves as a warning of what can happen in a country, right? When neighbors, who I'm sure are very nice people, turn on each other and somehow find themselves, supporting what we could call evil, or certainly call, fascist authoritarian movements. And we need those warnings, right? And we also need, though, there's also a message of hope in the book, right? I mean, there's a famous quote that Anne Frank had said: "In spite of everything, I still believe that people are really good at heart." And that quote actually goes on to say, "I can feel the sufferings of millions, and yet if I look up to the heavens, I think that it will all come right, that this cruelty too will end, and that peace and tranquility will return again." And I think so it's important to have that warning, again, looking at what's happening in our own country as well as in countries across Europe, where there is a rise of authoritarianism, And the warnings of fascism are here, not just the warnings, but we're seeing the behaviors. So I think we need to know what that looks like so that we can be tuned in to fight against it. But I think it's equally important to have that sense of hope, because while we have to be very clear-eyed about what is happening in the world and in our country, we also have to have some hope and some vision of a better future just to get out of bed in the morning and do the work that requires doing. And personally, I'm into my own way of managing that because, I am every day, all day, I'm talking to people who are in difficult situations with book bans or trying to fight what's happening in their communities, and stand up for the principles, the American principles that we hold dear: freedom, liberty, freedom of thought, et cetera. And of course, we'll get to Article 19 too. But I think about Martin Luther King Jr., I think about Bayard Rustin, I think about the civil rights movement, just as an inspiration of, these are Americans who were fighting for, human dignity, for human rights. And it was a slog, right? I mean, it was, you have to get out of bed every day and do the work. I mean, Martin Luther King Jr. famously said, I've seen the mountaintop, I might not get there with you, like that recognition of this is ongoing work, that we just have to keep doing it and have the hope and faith in the goodness of people that will make the change that we need to make. So that's why I say Anne Frank.
Yeah, it's a great book and a great response.
Mm-hmm.
So Article 19 of the UDHR states that everybody has the right to freedom of opinion and expression. What does Article 19 mean to you, and how does it inform your work?
Sure. Well, I want to read the full article real quickly, just for everyone listening, which is that everyone has the right to freedom of opinion and expression. And this right includes the freedom to hold opinions without interference, and to seek, receive, and impart information and ideas through any media, and regardless of frontiers. So I think there's a couple of concepts in there that are important. And as for what it means to me, I'm not sure how this connects, but this is what comes to mind, so I'll go with it, right? I grew up culturally Jewish. And I say culturally Jewish because my family was Jewish. They came from Eastern Europe. They got out, early enough, most of them, right? But I didn't have formal religious education or dogma. So in other words, there wasn't like I didn't grow up with a formal religious list of like do's and don'ts, right? But what I did get from my parents, particularly my mother, but also my grandparents, and again, this was just almost through osmosis, through how I observed the older people in my family behaving and talking, was I learned that every person, every human has inherent dignity as a human and is entitled to be treated and respected as such, right? So this wasn't, they didn't point to a Bible or anything like that. It's just how they behaved and how they talked. And again, I do have a recollection of my mother saying this like very specifically, right? I mean, so, and that, I guess in some ways was my moral and religious upbringing. And so when I read Article 19, to me, it embodies that idea, and reflects that idea in some specific ways, that every human has the right to dignity and respect. And of course, that's meaningless without, the guarantees of certain freedoms, and certainly the freedom and the right to think as we choose to think, to explore ideas, to discover, to express, to share. This idea of human dignity doesn't mean anything unless we have those rights guaranteed to us. And certainly, I think that those rights are embedded in the mission and the values of librarianship, which is my chosen profession in life. That's I always knew I wanted to do something that, with whatever time I have on earth, whether it was going to be, 20 years or 100 years, we don't know. I always knew that I wanted to use my time on the planet, as it were, to contribute positively back to, the well-being of all of us. And it could have happened. I mean, I'm teaching, a lawyer. I thought of lots of different ways to do that, and librarianship is where I landed. And so I think that Article 19 and the principles espoused therein really align very well with those principles and values of librarianship.
That's really interesting. I'm also culturally Jewish. I didn't know that you are. That's really cool. In 2022, the American Library Association documented a 38% increase in book bans and challenges in the 2022 to 2023 school year, more than any number in the 20 plus years that the ALA has been gathering data. And the trend is not showing any signs of slowing down. What do you think is leading to the dramatic increase in book challenges and bans?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's an important question, and there's lots of layers of answers. There's a lot of things going on here. So I'll try to peel back some of the layers here and address them. So, one, that these challenges and bans are being driven by an organized network of people that are sharing talking points and cut and paste PDFs of challenges across the country. So, there's always been reconsideration requests or challenges to materials, whatever you want to call them. And libraries have always had policies to address them. We've always addressed them in conversation and in collaboration with local residents, with parents, et cetera. What's changed now is that in the past, it would be one person, say, legitimately finding something on the shelf or seeing something and saying, I'm concerned that maybe this book was in the kids section, maybe it should be in the young adult section, or it's in young adult, it should be in the adult section. And there would be a conversation with the librarian, and there might be a formal process of review and that type of thing. What we're seeing now, and I think PEN America just reported on this, is that 94% of challenges involve multiple books. And there's been a number of, there's Washington Post has reported on this, et cetera, that it's very, very few people that are actually doing lots of challenges. Here in Utah, for instance, at the Granite School District, there was one couple that was responsible for 199 challenges out of 204. Now, a lot of these policies require you to read the book before you file a challenge. They're not reading all of these books. In fact, they're not even writing up the challenges. Again, there are networks through Facebook and through other channels where the challenges are just being cut and pasted and filed, right? So the policies that have served us well to manage these things when people have come to them in good faith are no longer working, because people are, in a sense, weaponizing the system to kind of flood the zone with all of these challenges and kind of grind, whether it's public libraries or school libraries, to a halt, or school boards to a halt, when school boards have to address these appeals and things like that. So I'll come back to that in a moment. So these groups that are forming across the country, some nationally, some regionally, really started initially to protest mask mandates. And they were showing up at school board meetings, and they were opposed to mask mandates, et cetera, or school closures, et cetera. And when that issue kind of faded into the past, the groups now existed. They had their Facebook groups, they had their connections, and they started to connect with some perhaps larger groups that had other agendas around diverting public money to school vouchers, et cetera, reducing government regulations. And they started to pivot to objecting to what I have to air quote CRT books in schools, and then pivoting to focusing on anything that had LGBTQ plus content. And literally, there's one of the leaders of the movement on the other side has said that they shifted from objecting to books about race and racism to LGBTQ plus because it was, quote, more politically explosive. So this is all about political, scoring political points, fundraising, but also trying to destabilize public institutions. And we have to remember that it's not just book bans. There are efforts to defund libraries, to close school libraries, firing librarians, targeted board takeovers to enable more censorship. And I think part of what has enabled this all to happen in some states, there's been state legislation that has enabled more book challenges. Florida, Texas, Utah, Idaho, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Iowa, Louisiana, and more. There's been anti-access or pro-censorship legislation, which has brought a lot of attention to the issue and enabled and perhaps, in some ways empowered people to do more along the lines of challenges. And then a lot of legislators are just attacking libraries and librarians and labeling anything that they don't like as pornography. So it sort of enables more behavior of their constituents. But again, the bigger goal here, and this is a much longer story, but the bigger goal is really to reduce trust in government. And the highest levels of trust in government, or actually in society, have long been with teachers and librarians. So trying to take a cut at teachers and librarians, reduce trust in government, and use that as a reason to then redirect public money to private interests, vouchers, et cetera. And broader than that, even just to help try to reduce government regulations on corporations. So that sounds a little conspiracy theorist, I fear, but it's not. It's all very well documented. But it's difficult because there are groups with lots of money behind this that are, I think, in some ways, like finding their ways into more local groups, that maybe people who have some good faith of concerns about what they're seeing happen are being hijacked in a way for these larger these larger groups who have a different agenda. I'll end on good news is we're fighting back and we're having success. So that's the good news.
Yeah. All right. Tying into that a little bit, can you talk a little bit about EveryLibrary's rapid response approach to dealing with book challenges, and describe this approach and tell us about a book challenge you helped to deal with lately?
Sure. So I mentioned we've been doing rapid response for a while. I'm going to come to that in a second. I do want to make two other key points that perhaps will segue into the rapid response. Is that I mentioned that these book bans are being driven by very few people. It's been well documented, and it's also been well documented that Americans are strongly opposed to book bans, and they actually don't even believe that there's books on the shelves that are a problem. And I want to specifically note the American Family Survey that had noted that only 16% of people believe that public school libraries have any inappropriate books on the shelf to begin with. And only 12% of Americans agree that books should be removed from a library if a parent objects. And the reason I wanted to note that as a way to get into talking about rapid response is that rapid response is really all about identifying local stakeholders who care about what's going on and helping them find each other, get organized, learn some skills to take action. And the good news is that most communities, the majority of people in communities across America don't like what's happening, right? And so they might not be aware, they might be a little bit aware, but they haven't necessarily been activated to take action because people have jobs and they're trying to put food on the table and pay a mortgage and raise kids so there's lots of news, there's a lot of noise, right? There used to be just 3 news channels. Now we're getting news through every channel constantly all day. So the rapid response approach is really about raising awareness. And when we find out, I'm looking over here to my left, I have a screen over there where I literally have had 2 people reach out to me just today to say, hey, we don't like what's happening in our community. Can you help us, right? So that's the first step, is they've either found us or someone often has said, well, EveryLibrary can help you, and they'll reach out to us. And then we've set up a call and we talk to them about how to get organized. And we have a platform called fightforthefirst.org, which is just a platform to help people get organized. It has some tools like petitions and events. And we'll get them set up on there with also some training and coaching on how to do the civic engagement work and the organizing work. And we'll say, okay, you are now the Concerned Parents Alliance of fill in the blank, right? We give them a name, get a logo, get a website, and then we get a petition going that says, hey, this is happening in our community, whatever it is. They're trying to close the library, they're trying to ban some books. And we'll get a petition going, and EveryLibrary will put money behind that petition within 24 to 48 hours through targeted digital marketing on Facebook and other social media platforms, put that petition in front of people in that community to say, if you care about this, sign here, give us your email, or give the Alliance your email, and then they can contact you, keep you in the loop. And then, within 24 to 48 hours, they might have 1,500, 2,000, 4,000 people that they can directly connect with and say, hey, this board meeting's Thursday night. You need to be there, or log in and do a Zoom comment, or send an email, or write an op-ed, or write all those things to bring attention to it. So that's how we do it pretty quickly. And then we also have what we call a voter file list, as it were, of over 250,000 Americans, actually about 325,000 Americans, who have already taken action on behalf of libraries and said, I care about this. Let me know if something's happening in my community or in my state. And we can do a direct email blast to say, hey, you might not know this is happening in your community. Here's a link to your local Alliance group that is doing good work to fight back. Here's how you can connect with them. And again, so we can very quickly, again, within a day or two, put together some pretty big groups. If we need to help people learn how to do this work, how to do messaging, because messaging is going to be different in Tennessee, than Utah, than New Jersey, than these are some of the states of the people who are on the call right now. But in short, we activate people and we help them, show up and speak up, and help them with messaging and strategies and tactics.
All right. Well, tying into that a little bit, what are some strategies that we can use to address book challenges in our communities or increase support for our local and school libraries?
Yeah. Well, I'd say start with the knowledge that supporters outnumber people who want to censor. And because this work takes some courage and it takes some energy. So it's good going in knowing that while there's a lot of loud people and sometimes saying some scary things and making threats, there's more of us than there are them. And I guess the bumper sticker of really what to do is to show up and speak up, right? And whether that's showing up and speaking up at your library board meeting, your school board meeting, and you can show up virtually too. And beyond that, right? Mila, you mentioned doing an email campaign to the board. It's a great strategy. It's a great tactic. Personal stories are very powerful. So encouraging people, to come before the board and speak personally about what books have meant to them. How a specific book may have had an impact in one's life, and the power and the need for seeing books that reflect our own lives. Like there's many different people in the community who have had many different experiences. And in librarianship, we sometimes talk about how books are both mirrors and windows, right? And the power of the window being that we can look into someone else's we can understand someone else's life and experience through a book, right? We project ourselves into the protagonist's shoes, and we use our imagination to to understand and to empathize. And then equally as important is that mirror, right there, where if we're someone in a community where we're not part of, say, the dominant race or the dominant socioeconomic fill in the blank, it's important to see ourselves, particularly if we're students in a school, right, to see ourselves reflected in books or our families reflected in books, because that sends a message that my life is okay, that my family is okay, and also that we belong, that we have a place here, that we have a right to be here too. And again, those books can help other people in our community, whether it's the school or the town or this, to understand our reality so that we can better connect with each other. And that's so important in a pluralistic democratic society, right? To understand, and it builds that empathy and that respect that we have for each other.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I actually really relate to that, like seeing yourself in books. And like, I don't know, I feel like I have a lot of books that really helped me. And like, I don't know, kind of explained what was going on for me in my life.
Absolutely. And let's give a shout out to authors, because I want to, and let's give a shout out to just the power of imagination, because I don't know, I think if you look at human history, the only way for us to move forward, to address challenges, no pun intended, right? But to move forward and to improve and to grow, and to increasingly recognize the dignity that we all have. It's imagination, right? I think we can only ever imagine ourselves out of problems and into solutions. We have to be able to see and envision a better world. What does that look like? What does that feel like? And imagine that that's possible. Because if we don't imagine the possibility of it, then there's no gas in the tank to do it. And so I think authors and the power of stories and the power of even the personal stories of people coming up to a lectern at a board meeting, it helps people's imagination expand and to see things perhaps differently, and to see how there is a path forward for all of us together.
Yeah. Okay. So to wrap it up for our question and answer segment, what message would you like to end with for students who are listening?
Well, I think youth voices, student voices are so important in this, and they're so often missing. I mean, we see a lot of articles and political discussions about what should or shouldn't be on a school library shelf, or what is appropriate or what's inappropriate. And yet oftentimes the students who are directly impacted by these choices, we're not hearing enough of their voices. And I think we can't have enough student participation, whether that's, again, through showing up at board meetings, email campaigns, letters to the editor, op-eds. I mean, like we can use our imaginations of what are all the different channels, social media, and ways for students to talk about what students want. I mean, we're talking about human rights, and there's a lot of talk lately about parents' rights and parental rights. And of course, parents have rights. But I would say something that we're not talking about is, of course, children and students and young adults have rights as well, right? I mean, so those rights, like all of our rights, are constrained in different ways, but students absolutely have rights, and the right to think for yourself, to explore ideas, to form opinions, to share opinions. Certainly, these are also rights that are shared by Americans who are under 18 as well as over 18. So, I would like to encourage anyone listening, regardless of your age, to get involved. I mean, this is, we create the world together every day. I mean, what we're experiencing in the world is sort of the sum total of all of our collective decisions. And so I think thinking collectively as well as individually, starting a group, finding others in your community, and speaking with a collective voice. And when we do that, I mean, oftentimes I see in communities across the country where decision makers are deciding to ban a book or to close a library, or all these, that they're doing it in what my friend Taslin Magazine calls a consequence-free zone, right? They're doing it because no one's pushing back and there's no perceived negative consequence. Well, when people speak up and when people say, I oppose this, what you're doing is wrong, what you're doing is not American, what you're doing is unconstitutional, what you're doing is like not in alignment with the policy that you passed, right? Now we're creating a context where there's potential consequences and there's pressure. And, as human beings, right, we respond. I mean, if no one's pushing back on us, we'll just keep on going. But if someone says, no, that's illegitimate in some way, or it's inappropriate, or it's unethical, or it's not reflecting the will of the majority in your community, it sends that message, and it creates a different context where it makes it much, much more difficult for board members or elected officials, et cetera, to take these activities. So, and lastly, remembering it's not just about the book challenges. It is about things like closing libraries and trying to destabilize public institutions, et cetera. And I guess the last thing I'll share is bookbanpetition.us. That's just sort of a bookbanpetition.us. Sign it, share it. Right. I mean, this is how, and by doing so, that's how we build the list of Americans. This is, if you put a petition in front of someone that says, I object to book bans or I support libraries, what we're doing is we're saying, hey, we're giving you an opportunity to identify as someone who cares, basically to put your name on a list along with others, again, so that we can do collective action or we can do local community action. And that's how we grow political power in America. So that's, I guess that's all I have to say about that, please.
Yeah. All right. At this point, we will open up our question and answer segment. If you have questions for Peter, please put them in the chat, or I guess me too, because there was someone who asked me something. So we'll start off with, so someone says, Peter, what's your reaction to anti-book banning legislation such as that adopted in Illinois and California and proposed in New Jersey and Pennsylvania?
So Martha, great question. And the broad answer is it's fantastic that we're seeing activity at the state level to push back against book bans, right? And it creates a model for other states, and in some ways it creates permission for other states and give other states the language. I think that there's some room for improvement in how some of these bills are worded, that there's some potential danger zones in how they're worded, and there may be some better ways, but that's in the weeds stuff that we can talk about, how to word legislation to really lock it up good, and to make it the best piece of legislation. But I mean, the overall, it's fantastic that this is happening, right? And there's always ways to tweak some of the language, and also state by state, you have to always customize that language for any given state, given the state's own existing statutes and constitutions and their political realities. So.
Yeah, and my only reaction to that question is I hope that the Pennsylvania one waits a little under a year so I can vote on it. So someone asked me, the Amnesty chapter at my school has been absent on this issue despite our library and librarian having been attacked by book banners 2 years ago. Can you tell us more about how you and fellow students engaged with the issue of banned books? What kind of activities and actions can I recommend to our Amnesty chapter? Well, I mean, it's different to every school. Like, my school is fairly liberal, so having that kind of support on just like a greater level, like my Amnesty chapter, we have a bunch of people that come to our meetings and like to organize these events with us. So I think that helps a lot. But some of the things we have done on this specific issue, our local school board was doing something that was, or trying to pass a bunch of rules that were book challenges, as well as, I think the wording they used was like not allowing anything of political nature in classrooms. So that includes like pride flags and Black Lives Matter stuff. And it was kind of ridiculous. So my MSD chapter had a like letter writing campaign to that school board, and I hope it was really successful. I mean, a bunch of people in our school got involved and it was really powerful. Someone else asked, Peter, you're right that stories are very powerful. Could you tell us a story about a particular successful rapid response experience you've had lately?
Yeah, sure. I mean, so sorry, I'm just doing some window management here, get my windows clear. So in Rochester, Tennessee, you may have seen in the news, Murfreesboro, Tennessee, passed a decency ordinance that led the library board to decide that it needed to start pulling books off the shelf to be in compliance with this decency ordinance, which is clearly unconstitutional. So I guess it was early October, a couple people from that community reached out and said, hey, help. And we quickly got them set up on Fight for the First, as I think the Rutherford Library Alliance, and they ran a petition. We put a little bit of money behind it. Within a day or two, I think they had about 1,500 people that they had identified in the community who wanted to work with them on this issue. And then just this past week, the library board had voted on there were 4 books that were being challenged, and they voted to retain the books. And so part of this, and there was a newspaper article about it, and one of the alliance leaders was in the paper talking about what the work they did. But this happened, I would posit, because when you have 1,500 people showing up, whether that's through emails or a petition or turning out many physical bodies at the meeting, right? And walking up to the lectern and saying, "Oh no, we don't support this." The library board made that decision. So there's lots of examples like that. I mean, and I'm sorry. Oh, could we link to the article when you get a chance? I'd love to read more. Yeah, I'll try to do that respectfully. I'll go over to this browser window and get that link. I did also want to just mention, I was remiss, I think, that so when I talk about EveryLibrary, yes, we're doing good work. Obviously, I think so. That's my job. We don't do it alone. We're part of lots of coalitions, important ones. So the EIHR, which is the Educators Right to Learn Coalition. I'm sorry, the Educators Institute for Human Rights, as well as the Right to Learn Coalition. PEN America we're in coalition with, many others. There's so many amazing groups out there, and we work very well together, and we share the Writers for Democratic Action as a new coalition partner with EveryLibrary. I mean, ACLU, FIRE, which is another free expression pro bono legal firm out there, organization, I should say. So there's lots of us doing this work together, and it's it's additive, and we work collaboratively very well together. So I just want to give some shout out to some of those coalition partners as well. And in fact, that's where I met Rebecca. I think RFK Human Rights I met you through the Right to Learn Coalition, I believe. So
Really cool. Okay, I'll give you a minute to find that link.
I'll find it real quick.
Okay, I'll answer my own question. What advice from a student's perspective would you give to teachers / school boards who are dealing with book challenges? What is a book that is particularly meaningful to you? That's a really good question. From a student's perspective, is helpful because I have no idea what I would do if I was a teacher or a member of a school board right now. It seems crazy stressful, and I commend everybody who's in that position right now. From my perspective, it's a big censorship problem. I think that there's no way to really have a full grasp of everything to learn in school if you don't have access to all of those perspectives. And all of these books that are being banned or challenged have perspectives that are really important to like learn from, like Diary of Anne Frank, and books that are being banned for talking about racial issues or LGBTQ plus issues. Like those are books that are really important to talk about. And I just find it like really, I don't know. It's just really sad, honestly, that all of these things are happening with books. Like when I was younger in elementary school, I would go to my library and I'd come out with like a big stack of books. But like I cannot imagine if I wasn't able to read some certain books. Like my parents didn't care what I was reading as long as I was reading the whole thing and giving it back to the library on time. But I don't know about advice. I just think it's really important to like stay strong, because as students, I mean, at least from my perspective, it's really like scary right now politically. Like I've stopped reading the news in the last couple months because it really is terrifying. Like as a queer trans person, like it makes me really uncomfortable to even look at. And I just think that, you know, being supportive to students and trying to also be able to teach them about perspectives that are not their own is really important. Okay, Peter, are you ready for your question?
I am.
Okay, what advice would you give to librarians who are feeling overwhelmed?
Yeah. Well, I guess first of all, that's the appropriate and natural reaction to what's happening in libraries right now, and to just honor that, right, as a legitimate, authentic, human response to what's happening. I think being intentional about finding your network of support, or if you already have a network of support, connecting with them. Right. I've been in situations in my own career and life, we all have, right, where you get into a downward spiral because the time it takes and the emotional energy it takes to deal with things. We may stop reaching out to family, friends, etc., colleagues, and I'd say like the calendar can be your friend. Like put something on the calendar, like I'm going to talk to this person on Saturday for an hour. We're going to go for a cup of coffee, and like, because we need to be putting gas back in the tank. I'm sorry to use like petrochemical metaphor, but as it were, we need to put some more sunlight back into our solar panels, or some wind into our, but being intentional about that. There's a concept that I came across. Dr. Richard Boyatzis, who's written on leadership and emotional intelligence, talks about resonant relationships. And I think of a resonant relationship as someone that when you connect with them, you both come away feeling better about yourself and each other. So you can think about who those people are in your life, and it might be someone you haven't talked to in a while, right? And just reach out, send a text, and say, "Hey, I'd love to catch up." And broadening that out to just self-care in general. I mean, and not like I'm not a wellness coach or anything, right? But sleep and eating right, taking walks. I mean, there's a lot of research on this. Even things like having a gratitude journal, just remembering, like, with whatever else is going on, if there's a lot of stuff coming at you that's not good during the day, take time to reflect and take a pen and write it down about what are you grateful for, right? What are the good things that are happening? Because those things are happening too, but our brains aren't tuning into them. And again, that's going to help give us energy. And then to expand out beyond the individual, again, remember, we're not in this alone. There are people in your community who care and who can support you. And oftentimes librarians are in position as government employees that we're unable to speak out with the fear of losing a job or being disciplined in some way. But there's people in your community who can. And again, if you know some people in your community who care about this, send them our way. EveryLibrary, Peter Bromberg, you can have my email, whatever, and we can help set them up as a group with a name in your community that can speak out in support of the library and in opposition to censorship or whatever other shenanigans are happening. And that then creates some breathing room for you as the librarian as well, right? When you have people in the community who are regularly showing up, offering praise at a board meeting, denouncing any censorship activities, etc. Because again, oftentimes we as librarians just aren't in a position to be able to do that. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah. I forgot to answer a piece of that question that I just answered. What is a book that is particularly meaningful to you? So I'll give you 3 books, and I will not elaborate. The 57 Bus by Dashka Slater, Stephen King's On Writing, and The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood. And I believe 2 out of 3 of those are banned or challenged. At least The Handmaid's Tale I know has been. Okay. The next one, someone says, these days teachers are under attack constantly on a wide variety of issues. One of the pressures is to stay neutral on issues. How can educators empower students to get involved on a civic level without being blamed for inciting students on a political issue such as book banning?
Was that question to me?
I believe so, yes.
I was looking for the question, I couldn't see it, so I'll just go by memory here. So that's a challenge, a tricky question, right? And I think like so many answers, they're local, right? We have to do some type of a local analysis, as it were, of what the organizational political realities are, because they're going to differ, and in some schools, right, you're going to have more or less freedom to do that given your administration support, given the community support or opposition, given what's happening on your local Facebook page, or but generally speaking, I think this idea of keeping it nonpartisan, and sometimes we talk about neutral, but I like to talk about being nonpartisan, that encouraging students in a more general way to be engaged civically. And I guess I can draw some parallels to when I do work with libraries on an information only campaign, right, where we train libraries who are trying to encourage voters to take action and hopefully vote yes, to not say to the voters, well, please vote yes for this, but, and literally this is the approach I took when I needed to convince voters in Salt Lake City on our budget, was I'm saying, look, here's the deal. Here's what we're proposing. I'm not telling you to vote yes. I'm not telling you to vote no. I'm saying I want you to be engaged civically, and however you feel about it, please go out there and be engaged and pay attention and vote. And I think you can draw a parallel to maybe how to talk to students as well, of being very clear. Like, I'm not telling you what to think politically, left, right, Republican, Democrat, right? Like, I'm not telling you. What I'm asking you to do as a young American is to pay attention, and to be engaged civically in your community, in the school. And so if this is something that you care about, one way or the other, go to the board meetings, tell the board how you feel, write a letter to the editor, tell your community how you feel. If there's other students who feel similarly, like, form a group and speak with a voice. And I say that with a keen awareness that in many schools, that's still a very dangerous thing to say. Like, however well you word it, right? Someone can come out and say, they're encouraging us to X, Y, Z. And so again, that goes back to you need to take an analysis of what your own institutional and political realities are, and also do an analysis of like your own level of energy and your own comfort level with risk. I shouldn't even say comfort level, no one's comfortable with risk, but knowing that there's risk involved, and how much risk are you willing to take on, and for what end. And I'll just conclude that by saying that it's perfectly okay as well for teachers, librarians who are in difficult situations, who also have to put food on the table and feed their families and make car payments and all that, to say, I care about this, but this is not a risk that I'm well positioned to take right now, and to understand that that's okay too, and think about what are other ways in which you can contribute. And encouraging students to be civically engaged may or may not be the appropriate way for you to contribute in your environment.
Yeah. Okay. Next question. Perhaps, this is to you, Peter. Perhaps share some thoughts on book banning as a part of a larger issue of censorship and your work with EIHR and R2L project.
Right, and so I was kind of referencing that a bit. So, EIHR, and I'm so bad with acronyms, Educational Institute for Human Rights, I think, and Right to Learn is R2L. There's a connection between those two. I believe EIHR helped to form and found the R2L project. And every library, along with many other organizations like RFK Human Rights and Albert Shanker Institute and many others, were invited to come together. And I much appreciation to EIHR and R2L for convening. I mean, the power of convening and saying, hey, let's look at the landscape. Who else has common cause and common concern? Who else has the similar value system? Who else cares about the things that we care about? You do the Venn diagram, where's the overlap? And let's come together and start talking about how we work together in alignment, collaboratively in an additive way to address these issues. I've been attending as a member of EveryLibrary those meetings for, I don't know if it's 6 months or longer, but really it's been great to make connections with other groups where, you know, connections start forming, partnerships start forming. Again, that's how I come to be here today is through that group. And but this is coalition work, right? This is how we make change. Again, it's the power of collective action and collective voices, and it's also the power of seeing where like none of these organizations have 100% overlap in their missions, right? If they did, we wouldn't need different organizations, right? We could all just merge into one. But we all have our own missions. We all have our own constituents, as it were. But there's significant overlap in our value systems and in desired outcomes and policy objectives we want to see in the country. And so we find those areas of common cause and common concern. We get to know each other personally, right? I mean, we're human beings, knowing each other personally, not just talking strategy and putting together a spreadsheet of who's doing what, but having some laughs together and sharing stories about wins, sharing crying together if there's a loss, right? And strategizing about what we're going to do next. All of that human relationship building is necessary. And again, I'm deeply thankful to EIHR and to Right to Learn Coalition for the work they're doing in convening and helping to facilitate these partnerships, which ultimately really result in the kind of actions that lead to the political change that we want to see.
Yeah. All right. So Melanie says, Peter, I have worked as a librarian for nearly 7 years. I love my profession, but working with the public is definitely not easy. What advice would you give to stay positive and not let patrons' negative feedback about programs, book collections, etc. dismay from the important work we are trying to accomplish?
Right. Well, that's a great question. I think I addressed some of that in the earlier question. Again, I mean, I guess the bumper sticker would be self-care. Like, we have to take care of ourselves. A lot of my life I've done in direct public service, so I empathize and understand, the realities of that. And burnout is a thing, right? And I think particularly people who are attracted to and find ourselves in helping professions in one way or another, right? Whether that's medicine or education or librarianship, or like, we're driven by a desire to help other people, and we tend to be tuned in and empathetic to other people, which can also be very draining. And so sometimes it takes some intention to zoom back into ourselves and recognize that that we, if you're walking the earth because you want to make a difference in people's lives, and if you're walking the earth because you want to make a difference in people's lives through the power of libraries and reading and stories, we have to remember that we're not going to be any good to anybody if we haven't taken care of ourselves and we burn out and we either get sick or we quit or etc. Right? So it's, even things like taking vacations, taking breaks, taking walks. Again, like, these sound simplistic, but if we do them intentionally and we do them regularly, there is a very clear additive effect in building our energy. And again, and also remembering to intentionally look for the good that's happening, because our brains are wired. There's a psychological principle that bad is stronger than good. In other words, and it's an evolutionary principle, right? We're wired to like spot the tiger and get into fight or flight mode, right? As opposed to maybe spot the plant of berries to pick, right? So that we're wired to like have this oversized fight or flight reaction to things that are stressful. And when that's happening on an ongoing basis, chronic stress happens, and chronic stress leads to all sorts of mental, physical, cognitive, and emotional deficiencies. So it takes some real intention to act. I'm going to get scientific here, but to activate our parasympathetic nervous systems to put some oxytocin back in our bloodstream to flush out the cortisol. Getting a little wonky here. But the things that I've talked about are the ways in which we lower our blood pressure, reduce our pulse, and kind of get recentered in our life so that we can get up again and do it the next day. And I'll add to that, in the end, I mean, sometimes we do have to leave. Sometimes that it could be, and I had a boss once after I left a very stressful job. And I won't go into all the details of it, but I said, I got to get out of here. I can't do it any longer, right? And I left on good terms, and it was self-care, and moved on to something else. And a couple years later, we were having a bite to eat together at a conference, and she said, I think maybe all you needed was a month off. If I should have offered you a sabbatical. And I said, I think you're right. All I really needed was a month off. Now, not all of us have that luxury, and maybe a month isn't the right amount, but getting away, whether it's a staycation or getting into nature, right? Sometimes that's what we need. But it's always going to be personal. I don't have a prescription. I have a buffet of things to choose from.
Yeah. Okay. So someone in the chat gave some good advice for students that I'm going to read out. So it says, check in with your school librarian, let them know that you care about this issue and are willing to help if the need arises. Thank the librarian for creating an inclusive collection. Also put that thanks in writing, copying the principal, super, and board president so that they know that the students find value in the library. Read from the collection, attend library programs, especially those that address marginalized communities. I think those are some great tips.
Yeah, and I think that was Martha Hickson, and I just want to give a shout out. Martha Hickson, if you don't know her, at the risk of embarrassing you, Martha, you are, and I don't say this with any hyperbole, I think a national hero in the fight. I admire you deeply personally, the work that you've done. Martha's a librarian in New Jersey who has been on the front lines. And so when she offers some feedback about things, put a lot of weight on it. She knows of which she speaks. So I'm honored that you're here spending time with us too, Martha.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Peter, for your advice and insights today. Thank you, Rebecca, and thank you to all of you who tuned in today to be a part of this conversation, and thank you for watching.
Thank you, Milo, so much. You did an excellent job, and thank you, Peter, for being here. And I'll echo that. Thank you, Martha, and for everyone who's attending today. There's so much good advice, Peter, that you gave, and Milo, your insight too about your students' perspective was just really engaging. But what I took from it most was this kind of hopeful response that we're not in this alone, that we just need to continue to show up and to speak up and to stay aligned with our values, that there are people that we can connect with and there's ways that we can stay engaged. And I think that's just an important message, especially right now. So thank you for that. And thank you for your real frontline defender work that you're doing. And I just want to give a special shout out too to EveryLibrary. Please go to their website, check out what they do, support them. And thank you to George School for lending us Milo for the day. We really appreciate you being here. If you enjoyed this event, let us know by sharing it with your friends. And also join us for our next event, which will feature Joe Eldridge, who is the founder of the Washington Office on Latin America and longtime human rights activist, in a conversation about the history and current state of promoting and protecting human rights, democracy, social and economic justice in Latin America and the Caribbean. That's going to be on Thursday, October the 12th at 12 p.m. You can register at rfkhumanrights.org. If you have any questions, ideas, or feedback, please contact us at sttp@rfkhumanrights.org. And just remember that together, as Peter told us, we can create the tides of change and create a more just and peaceful society. So thank you all. Thank you all for being here, and we'll see you next time. All right, guys, we've stopped our recording. Thank you all so much for being here.
Now that was the dress rehearsal, right? Now when we record, when do we record the
final?
Yeah.
Hey, you can come back and talk to us anytime, Peter. I'll record you all day. I've got so much I got like a page of notes here.
Oh, you're too kind. I was lying awake at 2:30 in the morning thinking, oh my God, What am I? This is how many classrooms is this going into? Yeah, a little nervous.
Well, it was great. So just in case we're still streaming live, I'm going to go ahead and end this, but
Oh,
feel
sure,
free
that's
to
fine.
contact me
Yeah.
later.
Yeah.
Feel free to call me, Milo. You've got my number. So do you, Peter. And just thank you guys very much.
Yeah.
Great.
Thanks so much for having me here, Milo. Such a great pleasure to spend time with you, meet you today. Thanks for the great work you're doing, and reach out if I can ever be of any support or assistance.
Thank you. It was great talking to you.
Yeah, same.
All right. Bye, you all.
Okay.